Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Are you ready?
For live.
Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Are you ready?
This live
Are you
talk.
ready?
Live
Are you
talk.
ready?
Yes, sir.
Are you ready?
Live talk.
For the word of the day, the knowledge and the wisdom will increase your faith. Are you ready for live talk?
Yeah.
Because it's about time to set it off. Are you ready?
Let's go.
For the word of the day, the knowledge and the wisdom will increase your faith. Are you ready for live talk?
Yeah.
Because it's about time to set it off.
Live talk. This live talk. Live talk. Living in vital energy. The universal language spirituality. Living in vital energy. The universal language spirituality. We're going all the way live with it. With live talk, increase your mentality, put away carnality and increase your spirituality. Let's
Are you
go.
ready?
Live talk.
Are you ready?
This live talk.
Are you ready?
Live talk.
Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Are you ready?
Live talk.
For the word of the day, the knowledge and the wisdom will increase your faith. Are you ready for live talk? Because it's about time to set it off. Well, greetings and welcome to Live Talk. I'm your host, Arthur Jeremiah, alongside my co-host, Minister Samuel.
Welcome again.
All right, brother, you noticed the 20th episode of Live Talk?
Wow, that's phenomenal. Big 2-0.
Right. You know what, y'all? I really want to have something prepared for this episode because we're looking at a 10 and 10. We know the significance of that. And I really want to have something, but we're going to have something for you here soon, coming up real special. But today, we're going to get into, we're going to follow up a little bit from last week's show, but we're going to continue with unsung Black leaders in American history. We're going to highlight another one today. And again, today, we're going to have our dear brother and historian, Aaron Holloway, come and join us to highlight this brother that we're going to introduce today and shine some light on. But before we get there, I'm going to give you a rundown of the show today. First, like always, we're going to have the minister open us up with a word of the day. Right after that, we're going to go to a quick commercial break. When we come back from the commercial break, we're going to bring in our guest, Aaron Holloway, the same guest we had last week, but we're going to be talking about another unsung Black leader in American history. And right after that, we're going to go to another commercial break. And we're going to come back with the book reading of the day, and we're going to get ready to close out. So with no further ado, Minister, what's the word of the day?
All right. The word of today we're going to have is community. So we're going to start with a little definition of community. And a community is a unified body of individuals. A community can be defined as being shared attributes of people that are in it and the strength of the connections among them. Community is a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common. Now, I'm going to go back over that definition because I want to call out the group of people living in a same place or having a particular characteristic in common. And this narrative is specifically, we're talking about Black history, African-American history, which we need to celebrate every day of the year, not just February, even though that's what most people recognize. We talk about it all year. We're highlighting it. And we want to bring out a lot of those who don't get a chance to be talked about. So when we talk about a group of people living in the same place and having a particular characteristic in common, some of those characteristics that we have in common is that we are Black and brown people. We're melanated people. We're people of color. We have common characteristics like we were brought up. Most of us were raised in similar conditions. We have had to overcome some of the same obstacles and share many of the same goals and aspirations, as well as having a similar culture and heritage. So when we talk about a community, oftentimes we say it takes a village to raise a child. Well, that village that we're talking about is our community.
I tell you, you read on point when we talk about community. One of the things kind of stood out to me as you talking about a particular characteristic in common. Sadly to say, when we talk about community on a level, when you think about us as a people, we have to define what ownership means. One of the definitions to community also is ownership, or participation or something in common. And when we think about ownership and we look at our so-called community where we reside at, there's no true ownership there to make that a true community. And that's why we find people coming from the outside and they come into our community when they see, if it was a true community of ownership, when they come into our community, they'll be paying us to get a store. They'll be paying us to do some of the things that they're doing in our community. But because we don't own it, they freely come in there and then they take over, possess it, and then they take money from us and they spend that money outside of the so-called community. And one of the things we talk about in common, when we, one thing that we have in common outside of all the things that you mentioned, it was definitely positive on a note that we really need to take into consideration. And we need to get rid of the notion of the negative side of it. But one of the things we have in common is we all want to be tenants. We don't want to own anything. And we don't realize that. And that's our biggest issue. And that's one of our biggest complaints. They don't want to fix nothing. Arabs, they come in, they own everything, but they slumlords and things of this nature. But if we want to take true ownership, or we want to have a real community, we need to take ownership. And taking ownership means when you see that abandoned building over there, let's pool our resources together so that we can buy it ourselves. When you see certain things, land, let's pool our resources so we can buy it ourselves. That's create and build our community. Now we have a voice in our community, and can't nobody come in our community like the police and beat us up because now we have true ownership. Guess what? We don't want you in our community. As a matter of fact, put some gates right there. You can't even come over here. You trespassing. If you come past that gate right there.
You got to respond to us.
You got to respond to us. And that's taking possession of a true community.
No, and see, that's the excellent point. That's what we bring out, what community is, but we want to point out that which is lacking. Because if you don't realize you have a problem, there's no way to fix it. The things that we share in common, we have to acknowledge, like you say, one of the big ones is ownership within our communities. If that's what we're lacking, then we need to seek to own our community, not complain about the condition of our community, but actually change and fix it.
Yeah, because I mean, for the most part, I mean, if you birth a child in the community, and I mean, I would think it'll be strange to the child to be able to go to a corner store and not see somebody look like them when they're buying their candy and spending their money. But everybody in the community that's walking around look just like them. But the person in the store where they're spending their money don't look like them.
See, that's the similar burden. And we have to acknowledge that we have that burden in our communities all across America.
And that's the sad thing about it. That's the part when you're talking about being in common. We have common characteristics all over America.
See, because we can't deny that. See, when people say, well, and you may have some of us that can be more fluent and in certain areas, but we have to be honest that if we look across the communities of America where we all have those same deficiencies and those same issues. In order to fix them, we have to identify it. And then it starts from the beginning of ownership. Like say, if you're a tenant, you need to seek to become an owner. If there's an abandoned building, why aren't we investing in that building and making our own community center the way we like it? If we don't like the way they run that community center, then build our own community center.
There you go. Don't just complain about it. You go around and complaining to your neighbor about it. He ain't gonna do nothing. He complaining to somebody else about it. You want to do something about it? Yeah. Pool your resources together.
See, that's a true
and make
community.
a change in your community.
That's a true community when you come together to solve your own issues without the outside influence.
That's it. That's it. Well, we're gonna get more into this here as we come back from this short commercial break. We're going to bring our brother Aaron in, and we're going to get deep into the conversation today. We'll be right back. Hey, shalom and blessing, y'all. This is Author Jeremiah Israel coming to you live. Listen, I'm so excited because my ebook version of The Spiritual Significance of a Name is now available. You can go to my website today at www.jeremiahisrael.com. Now, this ebook is pretty much available anywhere and everywhere that ebook is sold. I'm so excited about that because, see, ebooks are sold internationally, but I would like for you to go to my website at www.jeremiahisrael.com, pick up your copy, or you can go ahead and download the ebook version of it. Whether you're on a plane, whether you're traveling, whatever you're doing, pick up this copy. It's only $4.99. It's not going to break your pockets and not going, break the bank. So go ahead and get the copy of this ebook now, today, $4.99. Go to jeremiahisrael.com and truly become blessed, because it will truly put you on a path to defining your true purpose. Until next time, peace and prosperity. All right, welcome back to Live Talk. As mentioned, we have our dear brother that was on our show last week, Aaron Holloway. We welcome him back to the show today. Brother, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Glad to be back. I appreciate the opportunity.
Welcome back, sir. Welcome back.
So we have a lot to talk about. And the brother that we're going to talk about today is actually your homeboy. Out of Pittsburgh, I know he journeyed a lot, but he did a lot of his work in Pittsburgh.
Yes, he did.
And the person that I'm speaking of is Martin Delany, is who we're going to be talking about today. And I know many of you may not have heard of him. That's one of the reasons why we're doing unsung Black leaders in American history, because we want to highlight these type of individuals. And you're going to hear a lot of information on this brother today. You probably go to YouTube and find a lot of information as well. But we're going to, this brother here was known as the father of nationalism. So what I want to do, brothers, I kind of want to just open up, and I'm going to start with you. When it comes to like nationalism, that's for the audience to kind of get a gist of what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. What is nationalism?
What I would say nationalism is a group of people who have a collective identity. They're moving towards a collective journey, a collective culture, collective experiences, and they come together and they're moving towards a collective agenda, pulling the resources together, building businesses based on their cultural background, and things of that nature. So a perfect example of what I would consider a national group. If you go to New York, there's Little Italy. Mm-hmm. They have a similar culture, similar mindset, similar language. Mm-hmm. They come together. They built a community, businesses, they have ownership. So as a result, they operate sort of as a nation within inside of a nation.
Okay. So more true independency. What'd you say, Minister?
I would just like to add to that, specifically in our point, is African nationalism, because as he spoke about other races, even though we know that's kind of a construct, come together and perform that. But it's the African nationalism. We're the ones that generally lack that nationalism.
Mm-hmm. I agree, because I guess that's the difference. Because we look at nationalism from a general standpoint, but really the black man, the so-called black man in America, is one that's in true need of nationalism and independence, because that's what we talk about when we talk about nationalism, independence, you know, being able to do for self, you know, being able to, you know, educate yourself and things of that nature, as we talk about community. So getting a little bit into Martin Delany, the person, and like I wanted to highlight that because I want everybody to know what nationalism is, considering that he's the father of nationalism. And we look at some of the ones that follow him, like, you know, Marcus Garvey and some of those. And he's like the father of all this here. And a lot of people don't know who he is. Like, so let's talk a little bit about his background. Who is Martin Delany? Like, you know, where was he born, and like, you know, what year he was born in? Because if I'm not mistaken, this was around the 19th century or somewhere around there.
Yes, indeed. As you mentioned, considered by many to be the father of Black nationalism. So that means he influenced people like you mentioned, Marcus Garvey, the UNIA, Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad. The list goes on and on. We can keep just naming people.
Right.
Excuse me. But I think this quote kind of embodies who Martin Delany is. He was actually a contemporary of Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass said about Martin Delany, "Every day I wake up, I thank God that I woke up a man. But Martin Delany thanks God he woke up a Black man." So we're talking about the 19th century. So that kind of lets you know what type of brother we're dealing with here, especially considering the time that he lived in. So Martin Delany, he was born in 1812 in Virginia. So this was in antebellum America during our period of enslavement. But he was actually born free. There's an interesting story, a background story behind that I would like to share. There was a Black woman who lived in the 17th century named Elizabeth Key. She actually was a slave. She sued the state of Virginia in order to gain her freedom and won that lawsuit on the basis that her father was free. Her father was a wealthy white man. See, at the time, your free or enslaved status was determined by your father. So she won that lawsuit based on that. But check this out. Look at what they did. Right after she won that lawsuit, they changed the laws. So your free or enslaved status would be determined by your mother. So now check this out. This allowed basically free access for white men to rape and exploit Black women without producing masses of free Black children. So that's why they changed the law, because white men wanted to exploit Black women and rape Black women, but not produce free Black offspring. So that just gives you an idea of the way the system is manipulated.
When she went, oh, wow, let's change that law.
Yeah, exactly.
And make it back to our advantage.
Exactly. That goes back to when we were talking about power. But Martin Delany, once again, his mother was free, so he was born free. I would describe Martin Delany as what's known as a Renaissance man. That means he did a lot of things exceptionally well. He was a doctor. He was a journalist. He was a scholar. He was a writer, abolitionist, politician. The list goes on and on. He actually did an apprenticeship under a doctor in Pittsburgh, my hometown. It's interesting when you mention Pittsburgh. I never knew about him. I didn't know about him till I came down here. So, you know, we don't get a lot of history about ourselves, even when we're from the same hometown that person had to work. So he did an apprenticeship under a white doctor and ended up opening up his own practice. He was even admitted into Harvard Medical School along with 2 other Black doctors. But unfortunately, his white colleagues and fellow students, they signed a petition to have him removed because they didn't want to be in a medical school with a black doctor, with black students.
Now I want to get into like a lot of that you're talking about, and we're talking a little bit about his education, because we're talking about his background, where he was born at. And if I'm not mistaken, like you say, he was born to a free woman. And if I understand it right, I believe his father was still enslaved at that time, and later on got his freedom and came to live with the family when they moved. And I think they moved from Virginia to somewhere else.
Yeah, I know they moved around a lot. I can't track it specifically.
And I think that's when his father was named Samuel. His father was named Samuel.
I like it already.
And he came and joined the family after getting freed himself. It was mentioned a little bit about his family tree. And some of maybe the what, like some of the people that came from that he came from. And if I'm not mistaken, it was said he came from a prince.
Yeah, no, from what I understood in his background, because yes, his father was a slave, his mother was free, but his grandparents, and I believe it was on his mother's side, was actually a prince. So he had like a royal lineage, because they were not too far out of slavery. So he had, from what I understood, the parents had connection to one of them being a prince in Africa before they came here. So even though he was born free, he would have had like some royal heritage in his background.
Yeah, definitely.
And you mentioned some stuff that I do want to talk about, and that's kind of like his educational background. And one of the things that you mentioned, he was an apprentice at the time, and he studied up on a lot of, from what I hear, abolitionists, doctors that was. And do you want to talk a little bit about like some of the things that he learned from them that led him into open his own business?
Yeah, he studied under a white physician in Pittsburgh. I can't remember his name offhand. See, we're dealing with during a time where you didn't necessarily need to have a medical degree to open up a practice. That was true for a lot of things back then. As long as you had the training and you could do it, you were able to operate and open up medical practices and many different other types of businesses. So that's what he did. He studied under the physician, and he opened up his own medical practice after that. And then that's when he wanted to further his education, and he was admitted into Harvard Medical School. Now,
what I hear about that is he had a lot of people that vouched for him to go to Harvard School. So it was a lot of different doctors that he worked with and kind of worked up under. But one of the things that stood out, and I'll let you probably speak on a little bit. One of the things that he was learning up under them was coupling and leaching. And that's supposed to be something about dealing with diseases or something like that. He was big on helping people that had diseases or something like that.
Yeah, that was a medical technique that they used during those times.
Okay.
So basically, the concept was to remove bad blood from your body.
Okay.
So that removing the blood by draining blood through leeches, the theory was that would remove disease and impurities from your blood and body.
Okay. Because it seemed like a lot of diseases going around at that time, and he was one of the biggest proponents when it came to. He was a doctor.
He was practicing. Like I say, but then that's a really big thing. So we talk about one of the first three to go to Harvard. He was accepted, he was qualified, but because they didn't want they didn't want a black man sitting with them as doctors, he was forced out. It was not because he was not intellectually, because he was very intellectual, but they just didn't want a black man with them at Harvard getting a medical degree.
Before that, I think he went to Jefferson College or somewhere. Was Jefferson College like a black? If I'm thinking about it, because his education went from him working with doctors, and it was said that he went to Jefferson College, where he learned Latin, Greek, and classy. You know, so he was a very educated man, like to your point.
And he was tenacious because that was it was a like a Bible school, but it was also a college. And it was said that he walked 160 miles to get to that college for that education.
Wow.
So think about doing that in a car.
Yeah.
Now, he might have been on horseback, but from what it said, he walked 160 miles to get to that school and get that education.
I'd be tired driving 160 miles.
Yeah, that speaks a lot to the determination of not only him, but a lot of our Black leaders. They had to go through a lot to, pursue an education. Even Booker T. Washington, the same thing. He walked. You get James Farmer. He was another one of our leaders and freedom fighters during the civil rights movement, and he walked. I mean, he walked really far to get an education. So, from even when we were enslaved, we were always interested and determined to get an education. Immediately after slavery, we're like the fastest group to really educate ourselves in this country. We immediately reduced our illiteracy rate down drastically faster than any other groups. Even the European immigrants were coming over here. They weren't able to speak the language. They weren't able to read and write, but we were immediately after slavery, after it was illegal for us to read and write. So we've accomplished a lot in this country.
You're right. They got what, 400 and some years on us.
And his mom was reported all the time for teaching her children to read and write.
Right.
His mom was reported because she was going to determine to get them educated. And see, we went through all of that, and because that misnomer, and it's unfortunate that you want to have our people looking as if they can't speak. But if you take the worst of the worst, then how can you learn a dialect when you can't be taught to read?
Right.
So of course you're going to miss syllables. But when you become educated and become sharp, it comes quick. And a lot of our people were very educated, where they want to make the slaves seem like they were slow to speak, bad in their language. But our people became statesmen and attorneys and got the judges quick.
And more,
right out of slavery.
And more fluent than some of them.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll tell you another place he got a lot of his education from. He was a Prince Hall Mason as well. Yeah, exactly. So we can get into that a little bit because that definitely influenced him. Some of the information he was talking about is pretty heavy.
He was one of those that I thought he advocated and pushed that to where it's specifically for Black people to be able to get the knowledge.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you got to think about it. This a Black man of that time. I keep saying it. We're talking about the 19th century, 1800s. Slavery is still alive and kicking. This man educated himself, opened up a business, used that business not only to make money for himself, but to also use it, from what I hear, towards his movement, to help other Black people become free.
Yep.
Now, and I think one of y'all said something about him being a journalist.
He was.
And see, that's when you talk about a Black man or a woman, I'll just say that and they go into journalism, they have to have some type of education. They have to know something in order to make sure that they in line with what somewhat of the status quo, regardless of what education they had. But at the same time, understand some of the laws that may discriminate against some of their progress. And I think he was one of those ones at that time, and he used a lot of his education to move a lot of Black folks forward.
Yes.
What y'all say about that? Was that?
Yeah, definitely. After he was denied the opportunity to finish his degree at Harvard, he became extremely dismayed. He also was an inventor, and he tried to get a patent for one of his inventions. Unfortunately, at that time, black men and women weren't considered citizens. So a patent is an agreement between the United States government and U.S. citizens. So this really lit a fire under Martin Delany. That's when he started to pursue the option of repatriation back to Africa. And he actually traveled to West Africa, explored the Niger River, and negotiated with chiefs and political leaders over there, and was able to get land allotments for black men and women to repatriate if they chose to do so. So yeah, exactly. He uses education and talents to uplift the black folks for sure.
All right, so let's talk about him and his journalism. Like one of his papers that he wrote and started was the Mystery September, something like that. Am I on point with that? Let me make sure I'm on point with that. The first one was the Mystery September. Now that was a paper that he wrote that he used to put out. It was a 4-page paper that he did, and he talked about many different things pertaining to the Black community. What were some of the things, if you will, that stood out to you about him being a journalist and writing to make sure that he can get across to all our people messaging that was very important at that time?
One of the things that sticks out to me is when I study Martin Delany, I see the parallels with Marcus Garvey. You definitely see the influence there, because we talked about the desire to consider repatriation or connecting with African brothers and sisters on the continent. And we see that in Marcus Garvey later. And we also see the newspaper.
Right.
Marcus Garvey had the Negro World several decades before Martin Delany had the Mystery, and used the Mystery to promote African-American causes, talk about our issues and things of that nature. So you definitely see the parallels there. Now he wrote several articles and different type of books and things of that nature discussing our history. He gets into some pretty heavy information. He has one where he talks about the African origin of Freemasonry, the whole concept of developing sacred knowledge and information and disseminating that information amongst a trusted group of people. He talks about the origin of that in Africa. He talks about, he can actually even read the Egyptian hieroglyphs. So we're talking about the 1900s.
Wow.
We're talking about the 1900s. So we're talking about
technology and all that type of stuff.
There was no Google. There was no internet, there was no library to go to unless you walked 160 miles. And y'all said 19. This was the 1800s. 19th century mean 1800s. This was in
for our listening audience, we're talking about the 1800s.
The Emancipation Proclamation happened in 1865. So slavery was going on when he was doing all of this stuff.
Definitely.
And this was that Mystery was one of the, it wasn't might have been enough, but it was one of the first Black African-American newspapers published. And he did that.
Exactly. And like I said before, he was exposed to a lot of this information through Black institutions, and one of the most important Black institution is the Prince Hall Masonry, who's another brother we don't talk about. Prince Hall, he started the Black Masonry, and that exposed them to a lot of the knowledge about our history and the African origins of civilization and Masonry and things of that nature. So it's definitely my conjecture that, he's breaking down some pretty heavy stuff. He's talking about Africans being in the United States before Columbus. He's writing about this stuff. This is stuff that I study and I'm learning about. I'm thinking it's new stuff, but you start studying some of our scholars that were alive during our period of enslavement. They were breaking this stuff down. So he was definitely into some heavy information. And like I said, you see the parallels between him and Garvey. Garvey was along the same line, big on our history, promoting our history, big on Black pride. Building institutions and things like that.
One of the things that stood out to me that when I was doing a little research on him. And we know he had the newspaper, the Mystery. I think that was lasted for about 5 years until I think he was sued by a black man for libel because he mentioned that he was he mentioned in his papers that the black man was going around catching slaves and getting slaves back into slavery, but he later on hooked up with Frederick Douglass. And then they started a paper as well. Exactly. I can't remember. And I think it's the North Star.
He got him to write for the North Star.
Right.
And he got rid of that paper. He went to Frederick Douglass and started writing for him in his paper.
Right.
So we talked about some of the ideological differences between Frederick Douglass and Martin Delany, but you see, they still had the same agenda. They still worked together, just like Martin and Malcolm, which are I know y'all got into this a few episodes ago. They had some ideological differences, but the goal was still the same. So it's good to see people who have some philosophical differences still come together. So Frederick Douglass, Martin Delany, they were able to come together, work together, and get some things accomplished.
Why we didn't hear about him? Why we hear about I think I asked you the same question about somebody else. You might have the same answer for me, but
man.
Give it to me in a way. But give it to our listening audience.
We kind of talked about this last week with Dr. Amos Wilson.
Right.
And it kind of comes full circle because I mentioned last week, Dr. Amos Wilson talked about us being a nation within inside of a nation. Martin Delany talked about that a century before Dr. Amos Wilson. So it's kind of the answer is kind of the same, like you mentioned. You know, when you have someone who's, talking about promoting Black pride, talking about doing for self and building institutions for ourselves, not necessarily assimilating into the system, but creating our own systems, you're not going to hear about these people. Like I said, I grew up in Pittsburgh, and he did a lot of his most important work in Pittsburgh, and I never heard of him.
Wow.
Until I started doing my own research when I moved down here. So, we're not going to get this stuff in school. So it's important for these platforms to put this information out there.
Because I'd even add with that, because even though, like you say, after he hit these brick walls and realized, you know what, we just create our own wall. And this thing with Black nationalism, we say it because we know it's about us. Even though he embraced that after the Emancipation Proclamation, like he even turned his desire into, hey, there's an opportunity in the military. He pushed a lot of Blacks to go fight for the Union Army to get free. And you would think he would be celebrated. He was the highest Black officer in the military. He was like a major, a Black man he wasn't enlisted. He was an officer. And I think he was the first and the highest, but he's not talked about. And the reason, like you say, because he could see that, well, I'm going to get into the system, but if the system is not going to work, we can start our own system. So that gets kind of obscured in mainstream history.
I find that, you bring up something that him being a part of, the military and called upon to organize. And I think what was the name of the infantry? They called the color infantry.
52nd. I'm not sure, 52nd.
And for anyone to do something, as great as that, you have to talk about them in history, right?
Yeah, you think so. But check this out. He actually met President Abraham Lincoln. So that alone, everybody doesn't get to meet the president. Not today, not back then. He met President Abraham Lincoln and persuaded him to start an all-Black unit of the Union Army. So that's impressive right there. You have a Black man. And President Lincoln spoke of his intellect and, definitely recognized his abilities. And he was, like you mentioned, he was commissioned as a major. So he's definitely somebody who we need to hear about.
With the president, it was the 104th Regiment of the United States Colored Troops. He was the one responsible for that.
Yeah, exactly.
And this one, just any man talking to a Black man talking to the president, and then the president not only talking to him, but listening to him and going through what he said. So in order to win this war.
Right.
And that should be talked about. It's like the same way. I don't even want to mention the fella. I'm not even going to mention the fella with the rebel flag. But we should be talking about Delany.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was on the winning team.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, and just to add this in, we talked about his desire and him negotiating land in Africa for the Black people to repatriate there.
Mm-hmm.
He jettisoned that to come back and fight in the Civil War. So he had a consciousness that, there's work to be done here. There's work to be done also in Africa.
Right.
So definitely. You see a lot of Marcus Garvey.
Right.
Definitely see a lot of Marcus Garvey.
Yeah. And that's a lot for a Black man in the 1800s
Mm-hmm.
to be traveling from America to Africa as a free man, while all of this stuff is still going on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting here thinking, how long do you think it took him to get to Africa?
I wouldn't want to make that journey. I need a plane.
after what they did to us on ships, he was bold enough, but he still braved it, and he did it.
Yeah. And he organized.
You could have very well, as a Black man, could have been taken as a slave.
Easily.
They could have captured you and taken you as a slave, or you'd have died in the process.
Yeah. They could have committed fraud. Nowadays they committed fraud.
They take your papers and
there you go,
and just take them.
Yeah.
And now you know about it.
Yeah.
But you can tell he was a very intelligent man and well respected. Not only by probably some of those just in our community, but outside as well. To bring that type of information, not just information, but to bring that type of character and ability to be able to organize groups of individuals to be able to take on a mission. You have to applaud that. Yeah. And then as like you say, Lincoln, I mean, you have to give kudos. Thinking about it, he was losing at the time.
Yeah, exactly. That's another point. Yeah, we don't hear about.
Yeah, so it's like, who can we get? Yeah, exactly. And they say, we're going to get Martin Delany. Mm-hmm. Bring him back over. And it took a lot for him to do that, based off of what I hear, considering that, like what you mentioned, he was organizing and migrating a lot of Blacks to Africa. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, he was advocating for those here to build a nation within a nation. Exactly. And then he's seeing his brothers in distress, and he came to their aid to try to organize, to try to make things better for them at the same time. Yeah.
He actually served as the chairman of the finance committee for the Liberia Exodus Joint Stock Steamship Company.
Mm.
Yeah. And he well, let me just to backtrack, because this just came to my mind. When you ask, why isn't he heard about? Here's another reason why we don't hear about him. He was invited to give a speech by the mayor of Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. And in his speech, he told them, if anyone comes to my door, comes to my house, and they cross that threshold trying to enslave and oppress me, he said, you're going to leave a corpse. Mm-hmm. He said, he started naming, he started going up the line. He said, I don't care if you the mayor, I don't care if you're the judge. He said, that doesn't matter who you are. This is a Black man saying this back then.
Wow.
So he called him out.
Yeah, he wasn't nonviolent. So he ain't gonna hear about that.
See, because he knew the ones who want to come do that, I'm letting you know.
Yeah.
I'm calling you out in person.
Yeah.
Come to my house.
Yeah, he let it be known. Yeah.
See, that's the spark of Malcolm in it.
Yeah, exactly. And even just following up on the point of him advocating for Black people here, even after the Civil War was won, he traveled down south to work with the Freedmen's Bureau that was established to help newly freed Blacks establish themselves, integrate back into society. So he helped work on that, and he also ran for office as a politician in the South. So he was accomplished, definitely, and a major advocate for Black people.
Well, that's why I listen to the audience. We're talking about Martin Delany. By all means, we always welcome you to chime in. You can always do so by raising your hand, and just chiming in. In fact, let's put that picture up. Let's put the picture up of him. Yeah,
see that that's the Martin that we don't talk about.
Right, right.
Exactly.
And we need to be talking about. Not taking none from the other Martin, but see, there's some powerful Martins before that we need to be highlighting. Yeah. So we're doing it today.
Yeah, yep. And you can keep going back to because they existed even before this, brother.
And to think about it, and when we talk about like black men, women, or what have you, we always distinguish by complexion. Here you go, you're looking at a dark-skinned brother. Like this ain't, it ain't, a lot of times we look at some of the, what is the mulatto? What was it called? Mulatto? Brothers that may step up, and there's a lot of them now, they very pro-black now. I ain't gonna take nothing away from none of those, the brothers, I think E.B. Du Bois, he was one of them, but that find this type of brother here at a time like that, doing those type of things, one has to be left in awe.
That looked like us.
And was proud.
Without a doubt.
Right.
He was proud of that. But that speaks to the importance of having knowledge of self. Like we talked about him. He had a knowledge of self. He knew about our history. So he was never ashamed to be a black man. A lot of us, we've been indoctrinated in this system to hate ourselves. We're taught that we never accomplished anything historically. So that really feeds into the self-hatred. So the importance of knowledge of self is definitely displayed when you research Martin Delany. Because like we mentioned, we're talking about our period of enslavement, and he's expressing this level of black pride. That just doesn't happen. That comes with knowing something about not just the great African civilizations, but knowing something about your own family lineage, which he did. He knew he came from royalty. So no matter what physical condition he was in, even though he was enslaved, we all were oppressed back then. He had a free mind. So
well, he had to deal with the oppression. It was lynchings going on during his time. But in spite of that, it didn't stop him from doing what he thought he had to do. He didn't, like you say, because of his net worth, his self-worth on self, he didn't let fear stop him from saying and doing the things that he needed to do. And see, that permeates in us today. Like you're saying, when you don't have that knowledge of self and your history, it's like, well, I want to assimilate into something that I'm not, because you don't have any stock in where you are from. And it's like he assimilated to come back into America, but it's like, bring all of me. I'm bringing all of my blackness, and I'm proud of it. Not that, can you please accept me? No, I'm coming in because I accept myself.
When I think about that, I just think about, like, even nowadays, for a lot of black folks don't even like to leave and go to another state. They'll feel like strangers in another state. We have became very comfortable where we are. When you think about a lot of black folks that came from, I'm gonna say more of the 40s, 50s. And here you go, you have a man in the 1800s traveling to all these different locations, not knowing what to expect when he go to these locations, because we mentioned before, there's no internet. Like you can't Google and search, okay, Africa has this many people, this many black. You can't Google and search that type of stuff. Like, where you get this information from?
You had to know how to go travel and hook up with someone in Liberia.
Right. And not have so it's amazing that we're talking about, Martin Delany, and from a time such as he came from. And you would never expect that we'll be on this show talking about somebody that has done all those type of things.
It's just to reiterate the point. I think it also shows the importance of Black institutions that are able to educate our people. like I said, he was a Prince Hall Mason, and that was an institution in itself. So I'm sure that introduced him to a lot of this material. Like you said, you couldn't just Google information back then. Like now you can sit on Amazon, get on Amazon to order a book. No, back then you had to go into pretty obscure libraries. You might have to travel to Europe to, learn about the civilizations of Africa. You have to decipher through a lot of the racism to really pick apart and find ourselves in that story. So we're talking about a serious scholar. I've mentioned some of the things he was talking about. He's talking about the fact that African Black people were here before Columbus. That's some serious information to find out.
They would not have sold him that book in America. He wouldn't have found that in a regular bookstore. And if it was, they wouldn't have sold it to a Black man. He had to acquire that.
He did some serious research, and I mean, he breaks down some heavy information in his writings.
Because here, when we talked about 160 miles, he was 19 when he walked those 160 miles. The schools, Bethel Church and Jefferson College. He was 19 at the time.
So he was walking back and forth.
I think he had to travel to get there, and once they got there, he stayed. Okay. But he had to travel that far to get there for that education.
Still a long ways. That's still a lot.
And at 19. And see, for our young people, like we saying, we have the internet. Literally, you can sit in your pajamas and go to college on your laptop.
Right.
Someone had to travel 160 miles for an education.
Yeah, that just shows the importance of our history and bringing these people out. Because if young people learn about our journey and what we had to do to educate ourselves, go into these institutions where we can learn about ourselves and about whatever field we want to pursue, you definitely have a higher level of appreciation, because you're never going to have to do, or more than likely, you're not going to have to do what he had to do. So if you just have a fraction of that passion and that desire and that commitment to education, you'll go through the roof. So that's the importance of learning about these people.
See, all we have to do is get the ticket, get on the plane, and go. If you want a higher education, or you can get the train, you can take the bus, you can take the car, you can take the internet. If whatever you need to do to unlock that mindset of superiority that we have, which is around like this Black history. I saw a quote, one of the brothers. Black history is 24/7, 365. And that's something we have to push because it gets left out. Martin should not be left out.
And we definitely have to talk about more, because really Black History Month won't do us any injustice. Like we can touch on the surface of some of these unsung leaders, but man, it's so many. And there's so many to talk about. And then like this brother here, the father of nationalism, you got to say he was the first civil rights leader. Right? I mean,
between him, he'd have been right there in the beginning.
One of the first two, they got to be at the top.
And there's other brothers during that time too. We got Bishop Henry McNeil Turner,
when it was
Edward Blyden. I mean, the list goes on. There was a lot of brothers who were doing this work, doing this, promoting the same message of doing for self and things of that nature. So we really got to dig deep, and we really got to learn about ourselves and our history, and then things will come full circle.
Well, we sure got to learn about a lot of those type of things, and something that we want to bring, we're going to need to bring forth, like with some of the ones right here.
Like you said, this didn't happen by luck and happenstance. A lot of the ones they the ones who paved the way and had to really do that hard work of making it get to where we are, which is why we really can't take it for granted. Like as much as that happened in the 60s, it was so much work done before that even came into being. If they hadn't, like if Martin Delany hadn't did the things that he did, a lot of it would not have come to pass.
Right.
So we can't take that lightly. We shouldn't take it lightly and for granted. And I would also like to point out, not only was he a scholar, but he was a father, and he was a husband of 11 children. So he was a family man at the same time.
Sure was.
And we have to celebrate. See, we like to, he fathered 11 children. He was a father. Mm-hmm. And he still did all of this.
Yeah. Definitely impressive.
Now that's you just brought something out, because I think we was talking about this a little bit. I don't know if we got to it, even when we was talking about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and the women behind a lot of these men and what they had to deal with, and I just imagine his wife at the time, considering a lot of stuff that he was doing, where she was probably mentally in the process of him doing a lot of the things that he did. And I guess the difference is during his time, women didn't have a lot of rights. As you move forward, women start to get more rights. So Betty and what Martin Luther King wife, Coretta, they had more rights. And in fact, Coretta was a civil rights leader
and education.
Yeah. So a lot of them had rights, and they was able to step up at the same time. But you think about back then, this sister here, his wife, she didn't have a lot of rights, but she had to deal with a lot during that time. And here you go, and you have a man such as Martin Delany, taking on a lot of responsibility to better his people and his community.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that point up, because not only his wife, we mentioned his mother. His mother played a pivotal part of his education, because she was free and she was willing to move. She was willing to break the law to teach her kids to read. So she was majorly influential. And
I think she went to court.
I'm not familiar with that.
I think she went to court, if I'm not mistaken, to fight for their freedom, because at first when they was born, because their father was enslaved. So she had to go to court to fight for their freedom. And that's what caused her to move them. After that. That's when she moved to Pennsylvania.
Because Virginia was like just too southern-minded.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. So I'm glad you brought that point up about the women. We definitely need to have that balance in our lives. The women and man together.
Oh yes, our women, our queens have always been our backbone with us. Even like his wife was a seamstress, but our mothers have played so much of an important to take what they had to take and endure. It's like they were really like going through slavery. They were a lot of times our protectors. So for a man to be able to do what he did, he had to have a rock at home supporting him. Behind every great man, you go find a great woman. Trust me, he had a great woman in his corner in order to achieve the things that he did.
You got to have support. That's why I said you pull all your hair out your head.
He didn't get
you'd be stressed out.
He wasn't getting support from the society too much.
Right.
You got to come home to some support.
Right. And what I noticed back then, what I heard of and I have seen throughout our history, because we've been dealt with so bad, discrimination and et cetera, a man going out and had to get work and, XYZ, will come home and take a lot of that frustration on his family, his wife, or what have you. Oftentimes we would hear that, and I think with Martin Delany, being that type of person where he felt like it was important to build a family, build a community, family first and foremost. Like you say, 11 children.
11 children.
So we know he was building.
and he was saving money so he could go to college and be educated.
At the same time.
Yeah.
That's a lot to follow. It's a lot to follow if I'm his son.
Yeah. I think the important thing is that once you realize that even when you start a mission, you might not finish it, but you might leave a legacy and influence someone who might be inspired by your work, and they might do bigger and better things than what you did. So after him, you have Marcus Garvey.
Yep.
He started probably the most influential organization, the UNIA, with the global African consciousness. He had chapters all over the world. And then after that, you got Elijah Muhammad, who's a nation within a nation. He built probably the most powerful and successful organization that had longevity, because they're still going today.
That's true.
So he was influenced by Garvey, and so he did his work. He might not have got to the finish line. He didn't get us complete freedom, but he inspired people who are continuing to work. So that's what we have to do.
It's building on successes.
Was it Farad Muhammad and then Elijah Muhammad?
He came and got that from him. But it was Elijah Muhammad who was actually amongst us.
Amongst us.
And even Noble Drew Ali. Noble Drew Ali, he's another one. So people definitely picked up the baton and carried the work. So
from history,
we got to keep on going until we win.
I'm sure Marcus Garvey was inspired by what Delany did.
Absolutely,
because it was almost like a mirror.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was like he took that to a whole nother level.
He took the blueprint and he just added to it.
And they even, and I'm glad you mentioned that. Something else comes to mind. They even say the phrase "Africans for the Africans away and abroad" that Marcus Garvey made popular. They say Martin Delany came up with that. There's different theories behind it, but he definitely was one of the people who came up with that saying. So he definitely, Marcus Garvey was a student of history. He knew who Delany was.
Yes. Right.
Absolutely. He was inspired by him, without a doubt.
Yeah, you have to believe that.
Because going back to Liberia and for him to do the steamships, it's like he basically brought that work to fruition.
Sure did.
Yep.
All right, before we go to a break, we're at the top of the hour. If the listening audience or anyone want to chime in on our conversation today about Martin Delany, feel free to do so. You can raise your hand, we'll recognize you. And if you're out there on Facebook, you're watching on Facebook and listening in, you can chat, send us a comment or chat, and we'll definitely respond. Otherwise, we're going to go to our commercial break and we're going to come back with the book reading of today. We'll be right back.
Hey guys, Angela Scott with Scott Capital Finance. Don't you delay that refinance any further. Give me a call and let's pull the equity out of that home. At Scott & Associates accounting firm, you can get your taxes done in or outside of the office by an experienced tax professional. To schedule your appointment, give us a call today at 321-754-1360. The number again is 321-754-1360. Or schedule your appointment online at www.countonscott.com.
Welcome back to Live Talk. Today, our conversation was about Martin Delany. We want you to go do some research on this brother here. If you missed the conversation today, definitely go to YouTube, look this brother up. He has done some wonderful things in the Black community, and he's one of our unsung leaders in unsung Black leaders in American history. All right, so today we're going to talk about, as far as our book reading, I'm going to highlight some stuff here in the miseducation of the Negro. And the book highlights many of the studies done by Carter G. Woodson concerning the education of the Black man. Of course, we say Black man because around that time, the woman wasn't really looking, but we're talking about a Black man and a Black woman. So when we say man, we're talking about both. But he did studies in Europe and in America, centered around the education of the races. He was his studies was based on just seeing how the education system affected different races. Like here in America, he found out that the Negro was taught that he was inferior in every school that he went to. And this was something that was in the structure of the education system. And no matter where he went, it seemed like that was something that was already structured in the education system. And one of the things, and I want to highlight something that he mentioned and said, okay, he was taught this in black and white school. His studies showed that out of 100 Negro high schools, only 8 had a course on Negro history. And even in the black colleges, where it is a course of study, they only studied it as a problem and then they dismissed it. So the education of the black man wasn't talked about in a lot of the schools. You know, I think he went on in the book to talk about, it was like a black doctor, and it was asked the black doctors to talk about the education of the black man, to talk about the black man and, you know, his issues and what could be done. And his response to that was, I didn't go to school to learn about the black man. I went to school to learn about being a doctor. Problem is what that is, just like with Martin Delany, how many schools you can go to or how many careers that you can enter into as a black man without knowing about the black community or the black people. You get what I'm saying? So he was talking about knowing about us. And one of the things he brought up that was so powerful, you know, he said, we'll go to school to learn about Wall Street, to study finances in Wall Street. He said, foreigners will come over to study us. Yep. And get rich off of us. While you out there trying to find a job on Wall Street, they're in your community getting rich off of you. Yep. And I found that to be fascinating that, you know, at a time like this, and remember, you know, he was back in the 19th centuries, 1800s as well. So that was something that I found to be very powerful when reading this book. So, you know, and it was just talking about, this is the first chapter talking about the seat of the trouble. And the seat of the trouble is the education system. And that's what we all fall short at, and thinking we're going to be accepted, and find out later on that if you don't have your own, guess what? You ain't gonna have nothing. So I just want to highlight that. You brothers want to chime in on into that before we close out?
Miseducation, the key. It's not the education, it's the miseducation. As you say, we go and get educated, but if you're not careful, you get a miseducation. Like you say, if other people from other countries come here and study us on wealth, we go to the institutions, and unfortunately, we learn how to plug into the system, which to a degree is still oppressing us. So when we plug into that system, we benefit someone as an individual, but holistically, we still serving the oppression if we're not going to understand we're going to get this information, and then how's it going to come back and benefit our community? Right. And then the nation as a whole. We look at it from the perspective of, what can I do to get into corporate America? Okay, but when you get in corporate America, you forget about where you come from. Corporate America is not designed to raise up where you come from. It's designed to raise up corporate America. But if we want to get that information and raise up our own community, then we could put our own stock on Wall Street.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, I would just say, just to backtrack to Dr. Amos Wilson, who we talked about last week, that's somebody who was highly educated. He could have probably went and did his own thing and became a wealthy man individually, but he decided to dedicate his talents and skills to uplifting the Black community. Same with Martin Delany. So that's the importance of knowing what time and space you are knowing our condition, knowing about ourselves, and being connected to the Black community. So when you do get that high education, it won't be a miseducation,
right?
Because you'll be able to use their system to benefit us.
Right. All right. So we're going to go to a not commercial break. We're going to go to our announcements. To stay connected to us, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram at Live Talk Orlando. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Live Talk Orlando. You want to come on to the show? Join us on the show? You'd like for us to interview you? Then email us at livetalkorl@gmail.com. You can also follow the host on Facebook at Define Your Purpose 2021, on Instagram at Jeremiah Israel, and you can visit the website www.jeremiahisrael.com. Make sure you pick up a copy of The Spiritual Significance of a Name. All right. So last words for you, brother.
First of all, I want to thank you, brothers, again for allowing me to come on your platform. It's truly an honor. And for the listeners of the show, I would just encourage everyone to do your own research on not only Martin Delany, Dr. Amos Wilson, and many of the other Black men and women who contributed to our struggle. You have to find this information yourself. But fortunately, we live in a day and time where the information is available. We live in the information age, so there's no excuses. Just go and get it done.
Right, indeed.
I just want to say I enjoyed today's show. I enjoyed this conversation today about Martin Delany, because it's our history and it's good for us now to be talking about another Martin in our history. So I thank you for bringing that out to us, my brother.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and I hope, I want to thank you as well for bringing that out, and allowing us, to bring that on this platform to highlight that brother there, and I hope our listening audience and those that may be out there that's listening in or viewing in was able to receive some of the information that was shared about this brother today. And hey, talk about him, tell someone else about him. But I want to, again, like I said, I want to thank you. I want to thank our listening audience, everybody that tunes in and support what we do, and I just want to say from the host, peace and prosperity, and from Live Talk, we out. Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Are you ready?
For live.
Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Are you ready?
This live.
Are you ready? Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Are you ready?
Live talk.
For the word of the day, the knowledge and the wisdom will increase your faith. Are you ready? For Live Talk,
Yeah.
Because it's about time to set it on. Are you ready?
Let's go.
For the word of the day, the knowledge and the wisdom will increase your faith.
Say
Are you ready?
what?
For Live Talk,
Yeah.
Because it's about time to set it on.
Live talk. This live talk. Live talk. Living in vital energy. The universal language spirituality. Living in vital energy. The universal language spirituality. We're going all the way live with it. With Live Talk, increase your mentality, put away carnality, and increase your spirituality. Let's
Are you
go.
ready?
Live Talk.
Are you ready?
This Live Talk.
Are you ready?
Live Talk.
Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Are you ready?
Live Talk.
For the word of the day, the knowledge and the wisdom will increase your faith. Are you ready? For Live Talk, because it's about time to set it off.